Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Rekah, Hakwadash, Barakatah. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone that rule well, and peace and salutations to Yakim out there pushing this word in truth. This is the Brother I with another video, and I'm going to be talking about that opioid crisis that's mainly affecting the Edomites, the so-called white race, and that it's a righteous judgment from the Most High for the horrors the Edomites have committed against our people, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, not only in the past but in the present. Also a poetic justice, if you will. And I'm going to get into my first article on biospace.com, and the title reads, CDC report indicates opioid crisis in America is worsening. And notice how that's not a Jake hand on this patient on the gurney. America's opioid epidemic is getting worse. That is the gist of a new report issued by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The report, which was unveiled this week, shows opioid-related emergency room visits spiked 30% over a period of 1 year. The CDC said the increased number of visits were spread across the United States between July 2016 and September 2017. On average, states saw an increase of about 30% each. However, the CDC report shows that states in the Midwest were particularly hit by a rise in opioid-related problems, and the Midwest is home to a large number of Edomites, showing that this crisis is just tearing through Esau. And a lot of reason these Edomites are turning to opioids and other drugs in the first place is because, first and foremost, it's through the will of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, but these Edomites are losing their jobs through either automation or their jobs are being outsourced to other countries. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 116 Americans die daily from opioid overdoses. During the investigated time period, the CDC said Midwestern states saw a 70% spike in opioid overdoses. Of particular note are Illinois and Wisconsin, which both saw overdoses increase by more than 50%. Wisconsin saw a 109% increase in opioid-related overdoses, and Illinois saw a 66% increase, according to the CDC report. Other Midwestern states also saw growing numbers. Indiana saw a 35% jump, Ohio saw an increase of 28%, and Missouri had a 21% increase. Delaware and Pennsylvania also saw similar jumps in overdoses, the CDC said. Overdoses were also more common in large metropolitan areas. In cities, opioid overdoses increased 54% during the same 15-month time frame, the CDC said. There were some states that have seen a decrease in opioid-related overdoses, including two that have been hard hit by the epidemic, Kentucky and West Virginia. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island also saw decreases, according to the CDC analysis. Cases of opioid-related overdoses and abuse across the age and gender barrier, the CDC report shows. And notice how they haven't mentioned race or which races in particular are being affected by this opioid epidemic in this article. It's just them trying to keep up that so-called veneer of white supremacy. In overdoses, increases in overdoses increased about 30% in men and 24% in women during the period. In the 15-month time frame, the CDC gathered data for the agency said there was a 31% increase in opioid overdoses in people ages 25 to 34. For ages 35 to 54, the number of overdoses jumped about 36%, and for those 55 and older, there was a 32% increase. So this is just affecting people in all age groups, and this is beautiful that the Most High is recompensing you damn devils with this opioid crisis. And I'm going to get into my first scriptures. In Lamentations chapter 4, I'm going to read verse 21 and 22. Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, the Edomites, the so-called white race, that dwellest in the land of Uz. The cup also shall pass through unto thee. That opioid crisis, among other calamities that are about to befall Esau. Thou shalt be drunken and shalt make thyself naked. And with this opioid crisis, we're seeing just how weak Esau is when any adversity befalls him. The punishment of thine iniquity is accomplished, O daughter of Zion. He will no more carry thee away into captivity. He will visit thine iniquity, O daughter of Edom. He will discover thy sins. In my next article, we'll see some of the sins of Esau that the Most High is discovering. not just him, but us through finding these articles on the internet. And my next article is on wordpress.philau.edu, and the title reads, Crack, the CIA, and Media, all complicit in destroying black communities. That's a very fitting title for the CIA, Cocaine Import Agency. This is a pretty long article, so I'm going to just hit the points. Slovakia brothers. In the summer of 1996, a journalist Webb first broke the story that for the better part of a decade, the CIA had been essentially responsible for the influx of crack cocaine into the predominantly African-American neighborhoods of Los Angeles. When the story came out, major media outlets launched a massive attack campaign meant to discredit Webb, who ultimately committed suicide. And if you look in a little bit to the suicide of this journalist named Gary Webb, you'll see that it happened under very sketchy circumstances. It wasn't until 10 years after Webb's passing did key figures come forward to exonerate the journalist, who first exposed legitimate claims of the United States' dishonest dealings. During the time in question, the CIA had been overseeing an army known as the Contras, an operation in Nicaragua meant to dismantle the new socialist government that had overthrown U.S.-backed dictator Anastasio Somoza in 1979. However, when funding was cut by Congress for this covert operation, Slovakia, the CIA turned to smuggling drugs into America to further finance the Contra effort. This accusation became reality through the narrative of Corral Boca, a confidant of Nicaraguan dealer Rafael Corneo. Boca would be present for the frequent meetings between Corneo and Contra leader Adolfo Calero, who would personally pick up duffel bags full of drug money. The Contra's financiers delivered cocaine through a drug dealer by the name of Ricky Donnell Ross, Rick Ross, the real Rick Ross, who would purchase the cocaine, unaware of his supplier's military and political connections, turn the cocaine powder into crack, and wholesale it to gangs across the country. The cash Ross paid for the cocaine, court records show, was then used to buy weapons and equipment to fund the Contras. These accusations sparked a congressional investigation led by then-Senator John Kerry of Massachusetts, and in 1989, Kerry released a detailed report claiming that not only was there considerable evidence linking the Contras' effort to trafficking drugs and weapons, but that the government knew about it. CIA contract pilot William Robert Plumley would later corroborate these claims, asserting that he flew cocaine back to the bases with Uncle Sam's approval. If crack was never intended to damage minority communities, as publications such as the Huffington Post suggests, it leaves one to wonder why the U.S. justice system meted out severe sentencing to a mostly minority population, while one of the country's highest divisions of intelligence responsible for opening the first pipeline between Colombia's cocaine cartels and the black neighborhoods of Los Angeles were largely left off the hook. In the summer of 1971, President Nixon declared his war on drugs, proclaiming that America's public enemy number one was drug abuse. The following administrations, Reagan and Clinton respectively, would further facilitate the efforts, and while the professed enemies of the war on drugs were drug cartels in drug-sourced countries, those most affected were people of color in inner-city neighborhoods, chiefly African Americans and Hispanics. This attack on poorer communities was achieved in multiple ways, including mass incarceration, disproportionate arrests, and sentencing disparities. Since the declaration of the war on drugs, prison populations have more than tripled, and at only 12% of the United States' population, African Americans comprise 46% of those incarcerated in state and federal prisons, with black males being 7.7 times more likely to be incarcerated than white males. Despite the 1992 findings of the U.S. Public Health Service Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administrations that 76% of drug users were white, 14% African American, and 8% Hispanic, and drug arrests are a principal reason these proportions of blacks in prison exist. Furthermore, those charged with possession of just 1 gram of crack are given the same sentence as those found in possession of 18 grams of cocaine, an improvement from the previous 100-to-1 sentencing disparity, which was alleviated only recently by the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010. Given that crack and cocaine are nearly identical on a molecular level, the only plausible explanation for the sentencing disparity unfairly targeting crack users is because they are more likely to be black.